I'm joined by Claire Lehmann from Rebel Australia, our resident behavioural scientist. Claire, thanks for joining us. We're about to talk to James Damore, and I just want the viewers to get a feel for how important this issue is. James Damore put out this memo, Google's ideological echo chamber, and he started it as follows. I value diversity and inclusion. I'm not denying that sexism exists and don't endorse using stereotypes. And he put forward a whole series of positive suggestions, recognising the preference and ability differences between men and women, not making value judgments about them, rather saying this is the reality, and Google can actually improve its performance by taking on his recommendations. He got the sack. He's under attack from the left. What the hell has gone on?
Well, yeah, what his memo has sort of brought out, Mark, is the fact that these issues, which are just scientific issues, are moralised by people in left-wing communities. And Silicon Valley is a very left-leaning community, and it appears that Google extremely so, and it's become sort of an echo chamber, a sort of reinforcing cult-like environment. And so he put out a memo just describing some of the scientific literature which is credible and valid on differences between men and women. And the consensus is that ability differences are quite small, although men have some advantage in spatial reasoning and mechanical reasoning, but differences in interest is quite large. And so there's a very important study, a meta-analysis that shows that women are overwhelmingly interested in work that has to do with people, and men work that has to do with things. So
gadgets, machines, devices. Yep. Well, thanks for joining us, Claire. And now, a very important interview. We're to be joined by James Damore from California. Can I just say you've got a lot of fans and supporters in Australia because you're standing up for merit, you're standing up for classical liberalism, you're standing up for the principles of reason and enlightenment. We really appreciate that. But I've got to ask at a personal level, how are you finding the firestorm, the political firestorm in which you're now embedded? I spent some time in Australian politics, and it's not easy to be in this type of environment. A couple of weeks ago, you're pottering away successfully as a software engineer at Google. Now you're a big political figure internationally. How are you handling that personally, and what do you hope to do in the future?
Yeah, it's all very overwhelming, and it's very confusing seeing how divisive some of these issues are between different sides of the media, and even among some of my friends, where they've now sort of abandoned me. But I've also gotten a lot of support from some really close friends, which is really nice.
Well, you're making new friends and supporters around the world, I can assure you. Now, one of the reasons is that you're dealing in reality. Yesterday in Australia, we had the release of a study by the Australian Institute of Family Studies looking at the vocational preferences of 14 and 15-year-old teenagers. And it's a big study, 10,000 children, longitudinal study, so this is a big reliable survey. And it found for boys, the top 5 occupational ambitions they had were number 1, engineering, number 2, IT, number 3, construction, number 4, automotive technical trade, and the 5th one was sporting life and activities. For girls, total opposite in many respects. Number 1, they wanted to be doctors or dentists. Number 2, teachers. Number 3, lawyers. Number 4, personal services. And the final one here, 5th on the list, was the performance arts and production. Now, isn't this the point that you were trying to make to Google? This is just the reality of the diversity of preference in our world between genders.
Right, yeah, and there's a large difference in things versus people on that list.
And so you were just pointing out that people have different preferences and different interests, and over time this might affect their skills and abilities. But that was interpreted as you saying that women were somehow inferior. Can you clarify what you really meant there?
Yeah, it was really just saying that on average, men have a higher interest in thing-oriented occupations. And so it's seeing that tech is 80% men isn't really saying that there's just all this sexism against women that's holding women back. It's just innate differences in preference.
Yeah.
And how does this go to corporate performance, James? Because I would have thought if you're trying to shoehorn into various jobs people who aren't all that interested on gender grounds, the group as a whole is not that interested in certain types of professions. If you're bringing people in who aren't committed, doesn't that actually diminish corporate performance instead of the propaganda of the diversity people who say that they're improving performance?
Yeah, at least anecdotally, there are many cases of women that join coding just to show that women can do it, but then they realize that they really just weren't as obsessed as some of the other people, and so they ended up dropping out.
Yeah, I think, James, that's a really interesting point, because Silicon Valley presumably has a high quotient of young men who are on the Asperger's autism spectrum who are literally obsessed with technical things like coding. And it's unfair to assume that you can just pluck normal people, and women on average are more normal, and say, be this obsessed.
Yeah, and even I found that I wasn't as obsessed as some of my coworkers in technology.
Yeah.
So there really is a lot of people that will spend all their free time just coding and looking at other computer technology, and that really gives them a leg up when it comes to working in the tech sector.
And in terms of measuring these outcomes, I notice at the final page of your memo that you circulated, you write that we haven't been able to measure any effect of our unconscious bias training, and it has the potential for overcorrecting or backlash, especially if made mandatory. Why weren't they measuring outcomes here? And is there inside Google any sense of performance measurement that diversity is actually a positive or a negative, or it's more a religion, an article of faith?
Yeah, it's largely just a religion or a dogma that they've been pushing on us. They have tried to measure benefits, but they really haven't been able to measure any benefits from this. And for example, the unconscious bias training, there is a lot of potential for backfiring, especially when it's mandatory, and you really telling people, oh no, don't do this, don't do this, don't do this. People don't like being told that they're sexist and racist.
Yeah. And it has the potential to cause resentment. Now, all of the evidence you put forward in your memo, James, is scientifically valid evidence. It's, you cited a lot of meta-analyses and systematic reviews, and I'm wondering, were the Google management aware of this research and are just ignoring it, or were they not in touch with the scientific consensus on these issues?
Yeah, it's hard to say. I mean, at least part of it was that they were just reacting to the angry mob.
Yeah.
So even if they were aware that this was scientifically valid, they still had to do something about it because there was just so many angry people. And I think those angry people weren't aware of it, though.
Right. Can you tell us more about the angry people? So what actually happened? I mean, I'm not aware of what happened internally.
Yeah, so I shared it with some people. It was about a month ago. I shared it with some people. I shared it with the diversity programs. There was just good reasoned discussion. But then once it became viral within Google, there were a lot of people just shaming me and sending nasty messages and just saying, oh, no, this is harmful. This is Nazi propaganda. This is misogynist. And it was really misrepresentation of what I was trying to do, which was actually helping Google and trying to use science to at least address the gender gap.
Yeah, and you would assume that helping them develop some more effective diversity policies would be good for the bottom line, as well as diversity. Was that your assumption when you were writing the memo?
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, generally, using evidence is good.
You're very old-fashioned.
Yeah.
Well, that's very striking. I've read the memo several times, including this morning, and it seemed to me to be a positive attempt to try and help the company. But you've been branded not a micro-aggressor, but a macro-aggressor, and unfortunately, tragically, been sacked. And I notice on page 8 of the memo, you write of Google as having created a silent, psychologically unsafe environment, and then in your Wall Street Journal article, you wrote of it as being like a cult-like workplace. Can you just elaborate on that? It all sounds very unhealthy.
Yeah, so Psychological safety is one thing that Google has found to be predictive of teamwork and worker productivity, and it has a lot to do with being able to speak up and not feeling like or fearing that you'll be harshly judged. And this really shows how psychologically unsafe the environment is, where you can't speak up against any of this dogma because you will be harshly judged, and in my case, fired. And so, I mean, it happens at the large scale and also just small scale. You can't say anything that's against it, otherwise you'll be shamed.
James, have you had people supporting you through back channels, but in public denouncing the memo?
So I haven't had anyone that was actually living a double life, but there have been many people that were privately supporting me. And most of the denouncement was this public virtue signaling.
Right.
Well, I think the public support in Australia is with you, and we're very worried in this country and internationally about the loss of the Enlightenment, the age of reason. You've described yourself as a classical liberal who values individualism and reason.
Yeah.
Really what you're saying, I mean, at one level it's hard to get our minds around this, but inside Google and like organisations, there's a rolling back of the principles of evidence-based judgments, of reason, of enlightenment, of engaging in debate. This is scary stuff, isn't it?
Definitely, and I really wish that Google was more evidence-based rather than just a dogma-based on these types of issues.
Well, I think it's scary for our society, but do we need to be worried outside of Google in terms of their management of their information product? For instance, I put into the Google search engine last night the phrase gays opposed to gay marriage, and the top 5 items were actually pro-gay marriage, including 18 arguments against gay marriage and why they're bollocks. I then went to the Bing search engine and put in the same phrase, gays opposed to gay marriage, and the top 5 were actually against gay marriage, headed by I'm gay and I oppose same-sex marriage. Should we be worried about these search engines and the algorithms and the trending lists, that they too have been jaundiced by this cult-like political environment?
Yes, I don't know about the actual search algorithms, but there have been ways of, for example, how we judge whether a video is harmful or offensive. There's a lot of room for political bias to go in there, and there's been a lot of at least anecdotal evidence of right-wing videos being demonetized on YouTube, and where they've lost subscribers, and there's a lot of conspiracy theories behind that, but a lot of it could be just that we're choosing what is harmful based on their own political bias of, oh, this right-wing stuff is harmful, but shaming white males, that's great.
That's fine. That's the orthodoxy. So can you just elaborate there? How much discretion internally do the Google staff have for making a value judgment about what's a morally sound video and what's not, or what should appear on a search engine?
I think it may not be coming directly from the top, but there are very subtle ways in which it can be shown, just because what offends you personally does have a lot to do with your political orientation.
So we should be worried about this cult-like environment spilling over into free public access to reasonable information.
Yeah, I think there's definitely possibilities that it may encroach in our ability to access information, and it's something that Google really needs to address.
And what can we do about it? I mean, we're all opposed to the idea of heavy state regulation of the internet, but it's becoming apparent, Facebook and now Google, YouTube, we can't really leave it in the hands of corporate leftists who engage in acts of shaming and dogma and ideological obsession, and allow that to spill over into their work management. What can we do about it?
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out, actually, because I would like to help to change this, and I'm trying, at least with my few contacts within Google, to help, but I'm still trying to figure out how those on the outside can help influence Google and help it change.
Well, and James, do you think that just fostering diversity of opinion and thinking about diversity, not just in terms of gender and skin color, but also in terms of viewpoint, do you think that would be a healthy shift for the company?
Yeah, it's definitely, and I tried to bring that up in the document, although that was one thing that was lost in all the outrage.
Yeah, I mean, the title of your memo was the ideological echo chamber, Google's ideological echo chamber. But have you felt that other people are craving more viewpoint diversity within the company and within the larger Silicon Valley community?
There definitely are some people, especially those that don't hold to this dogma, but those that are in it really do feel like it's the good thing to do to silence opposing viewpoints. Okay. And that's what we've seen in a lot of the university protests, at least in America.
And is there a large sort of majority who are not really that political, but are sort of scared of those who are more political?
Yeah, so there's a small percent that are very angry and very activist, and then there's many that just go with the crowd and don't want to be publicly shamed.
Yeah, that would be my expectation. And so do you feel that speaking out the way that you have has sort of given a voice or given perhaps other people courage to also speak out?
Yes, at least in some way, but although it did show an example of what goes wrong when you do speak out.
That's right.
Well, I hope you continue to speak out, James. I think you're the Martin Luther of our time, because there's a lot of people worried about the loss of meritocracy, the loss of fair play, the loss of reason, the loss of enlightenment, all replaced by political correctness and identity politics. And I notice in your memo you had a critique of communism and why it fell over. My own view is communism fell over because it tried to resist the inevitable laws of human nature. I think the identity and diversity project, so-called, will fall over for similar reasons. So I hope you can work out those ways to encourage institutional reform at Google and other places. So thanks for joining us this evening. We really appreciate your time and all the very best for the future. You're a hero.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Great to be here.
So if you like that video, share it with all your friends on social media, and don't forget the Rebel Media campaign, They Can't Stop Us. Absolutely indeed, they can't stop us.